Okay.
Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Noki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for a conversation that's a little close to home today. It's around disaster resilience and asset leadership. It will be an open discussion, and we will start off by talking about the Wyoming Highway 22 that slid out and is limiting traffic flow to Jackson Hole. But before we get to that discussion, we just want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members who help make programming like this possible. And one of our members, Kimon Onuma, one of our patron members, has an upcoming event with the ALN next Thursday at 3. A continuation of the National Institute of Building Sciences program, Brains and Bytes, that involves digital twins, artificial intelligence, and more. So hopefully we'll see you next week here at this time. Mike, did you want to say any more about the NIBS program, or should we get into it?
Um, Thanks. Let me just remind people that this is an ongoing workshop with the National Institute of Building Sciences. And Kimono Numa is a member of both the National Institute of Building Sciences and the Asset Leadership Network. And we're working together to show the capabilities of digital twins, AI, governed with asset management to dramatically improve outcomes for organizations. And it's a chance for people to get personally involved with either their owner organization to provide information that gets processed, or their software or their consulting organization. So you can reach out to me, and I'm going to put my email in the chat if you want to participate in any way on the 20th.
Mike, and can I just say that it's really, it's kind of a mouthful, all of what you said, in that, this program is about digital twins governed by asset management and leadership. But I really recommend, if people haven't seen any of these programs, come check it out, because it really tells the story in a powerful way how we can use these technologies. And they need a governance structure so that they don't run away with our time, data, or money. And
And also in our preparation discussions, Nick mentioned that these workshops are good ways to address potential disasters and disaster response planning. So
Mike,
we'll
and
circle back around to that.
yeah, and maybe the last point on that would just be the technology is changing, at least in this realm of artificial intelligence, and it sounds like digital twins, data management as far as buildings and infrastructure, all that stuff is changing so quickly that it is really important to utilize, more agile and fast acting methods that Kimono Numa is really a pioneer of, as compared to the traditional long timeline of architecture, engineering, design. That timeline was very long, and it didn't allow for the use of modern technology because it was such a long process. And now this kind of shortens that potentially.
Exactly.
So that takes us to today's discussion. And for people who don't know, I'm calling in from Lander, Wyoming. About 2.5 hours from my house is Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a small town famous for its backcountry skiing, or amazing resort skiing, whatever you're into, and also access to Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone. And recently, a highway that connects Jackson Hole over Teton Pass to a neighboring Idaho community, a landslide occurred overnight a few nights ago, I believe. And the access to Jackson Hole from Idaho now has to go around. I'm told the commute is now about 3 times what it was. And
Three
obviously,
hours instead of 30 minutes.
or I think I heard 3 times what it was, so maybe only an hour and a half if it was 30 minutes or but anyway, you can see in that bottom lower photo, what obviously that road has never seen more consistent use. And I would just tell people that Jackson Hole, like many places in the country, and maybe the world, has been getting more expensive to live. It's harder to find affordable living housing, and so people are living elsewhere, often in this neighboring Idaho community, and commuting into Jackson Hole every day to work. And so this landslide has really affected, not only tourists, but the people who their livelihood is being affected by this change in transportation availability. And so we're here today to talk about the asset management implications that affect not only, road and road maintenance and tourism, but the people who live and work in communities, and how disasters can, affect them in different ways. Some people are more affected than others.
We certainly are not picking on this incident. We're trying to use this incident as an example of how assets are interconnected in ways that leaders frequently are not planning for. And this is an excellent example of how a road asset is not just valuable as a road, it's valuable as a source of income for people. It's valuable to the city of Jackson Hole, which needs to be servicing this high end vacationing clientele that flies in. And it's hugely disruptive if one asset is taken out. And the Key Bridge got us started, the Key Bridge disaster got us started thinking about how the asset leadership network can help bring information to leaders around the country, around the world, to help them begin to prepare more for the increasing amount of disasters that humanity is looking at. It's just on record that things are increasing. And so we appreciate you having interest in this conversation. And we've got a good audience. Thank you for attending. And we've got some ALN senior fellows and longtime participants online. So if you're a recent ALN senior fellow, anybody can comment in the chat box. And we would like you to volunteer to express your opinions, especially if you have opinions on how the insurance industry can help guide leadership towards asset management governance as a way of reducing risk. Because that's basically what we're trying to deal with here is we are facing increasing risk, and asset management can asset management governments can guide that. So thank you. We see that Jack Kelly is interested in sharing some ideas. So Mr. Kelly will make you a panelist.
Mike, and did you say Jack has worked with FEMA in the
Jack has
realm?
studied FEMA
Okay.
very extensively and is quite aware of an extensive array of asset management documentation available. So, Mr. Kelly, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm trying to start my video. There we go.
Hello, sir.
So when I saw this invitation, it made me think about my most recent work with Working Group 7 and ISO 55011, which was out for ballot right now. And for those of you who aren't aware of it, I mean, most people when they think about asset management that think about asset management within individual organizations. And for that, you go to ISO 55000, 55001. In fact, you go to all of the ISO 55000 standards except for 55011. 55011 is applicable to municipalities, governments, anybody who has asset management goals that cut across organizations. And that is a resilience issue. That is a sustainability issue. And that's basically an issue. If you've got national goals or government goals, whether it's for your city, for your county, for your state, for your nation, you have to engage a lot of organizations in adopting asset management, because that's the way you're going to broaden the ability of all the organizations in your country, let's say, to meet their goals. In fact, meet national goals like being able to respond to disasters in a comprehensive way, or to prevent disasters by getting ahead of the game through good asset management. Because a flood might take out your water supply, it might take out your electricity net. It could do a lot of things. It could cause damage to your public buildings and your other public facilities. The same way with a hurricane, the same way with tornadoes. So a lot of these disasters don't just hit a single bridge or a single electrical net. They ripple across the entire area. And so it requires a broad response, which goes beyond any single organization implementing asset management. So that's what 55011 helps people do. And so I just want to put a little plug out there and get people who may not be familiar with 55011 to say, well, maybe I should get familiar with it.
So 55011 has not been publicly made available yet. It is a document that is being reviewed by the volunteers in the ISO 251 technical advisory group.
Yeah, but I can kind of give you a very brief overview of what 55011 does. Basically, it says, if you I have to get probably a little weedy here, and I don't want to do that right now. Let me offer opportunities to other people to weigh in on this before I do that.
Okay, well, we'll just say that it is a document that's in process, and Jack is very excited about its ability to provide guidance for asset management across multiple organizations. I suspect that's through use of policy.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. It's the way to engage the public policy making process so that you result in maybe regulations or laws or tax incentives, different things that can promote the adoption of asset management. And I'm so glad you mentioned the insurance industry, because the insurance industry has an inherent would receive an inherent benefit by setting its insurance rates based on what the extent to which the insuree has engaged with asset management, has developed or demonstrated a competence in asset management. And same with lenders, because this is something we experienced with the District of Columbia. Remember, Mike? District of Columbia got a better bond rating because it demonstrated that it had a handle on its asset management that showed the lending agencies and the bond rating agencies that it was a lower risk receiver of the loans. And so the same way with insurees, if you can demonstrate to your insurance company that you have implemented asset management, they should cut you a break, because you are a much lower risk from an insurance perspective by having asset management than otherwise. So those are some kinds of things that we make people aware of in 55011.
So one of the things that the example in Wyoming points out is how proper asset management is an equity issue. And if there's anyone out there who wants to talk about emergency preparedness and emergency response related to equity, please let us know in the chat and we will make you a panelist. Nick, you had brought up some issues of equity and asset management, emergency preparedness asset management.
Well, I was just remembering last week on our program, we heard from Mark Morial. It was an old video from a few years ago when he presented to the ALN, but he talked about in New Orleans how the stormwater system is extensive, and how they prioritized investments and improvements. Mark Morial at the time brought up as questioning the equity of it because it relied mostly on property values and how the affected areas, how much it would cost to fix affected areas. And he said that will naturally lend all prioritization to go to more wealthy areas, and that's not fair, and it's it ultimately is not it's a short-sighted solution. And so just thinking about Jackson Hole, I wonder, if a little more attention could be given to the commuter population that's living in Idaho. They don't maybe have immediate needs to spend money on, getting from Jackson to Idaho, but thinking holistically, maybe they would want to work a little more with the highway administration and resilience in all of those communities. I see a hand up from,
let's see who has their hand up. So Jack, you work with your municipality, Rockville.
Yeah, I do, but and I'm on the financial advisory board there. I have tried to get the public works director in Rockville to understand the value of asset management, but in his mind, he already understands asset management in a way that he thinks is compelling. Now, I don't think he has, as far as I know he doesn't have a strategic asset management plan, and I'm not even sure he has specific asset management plans. But he believes that he understands life cycle costing. He believes that he understands the need to kind of plan ahead and understand facility conditions. Like, he's got pipes that are over 100 years old and they're not supposed to last more than 50. So he's aware of these kinds of things. But it's like all of us. We don't know what we don't know. So, and he just hadn't realized what he doesn't know with regard to asset management.
Well, in his defense, it took 8 years for the Department of Defense and for the architect of the Capitol from the first time we started talking with them to the time that they took big steps to initiate asset management. So we've got to understand we're talking long periods of times for this human evolution towards a leadership perspective with assets. Paul, welcome. Paul,
thank you.
Will you say your title?
Director of Business Development, B. Riley Advisory Services.
And you provide insurance services.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're a valuation advisor, so we do a property valuation work for lots of different enterprise objectives. So I don't hold myself out as an insurance industry expert, but as I understand from colleagues in that arena, in terms of trying to give advantages to companies or government agencies that are adopting asset management, you would think logically that there would be some opportunity for that. But we're still trying to get our arms around other economic factors that go into the model of how insurance carriers insure properties. So it's not a very cut and dried scenario. And so I don't have any clarity on whether there can be deals had for enterprises that are adopting insurance or asset management. But yeah, that's something definitely that we're trying to strive to promote.
Well, thank you for being involved with the ALN as a senior fellow to pursue this. And we met earlier this week with another senior fellow, Art Kurland, and are talking about connecting with the National Institute of Building Sciences, finance and insurance and real estate as a way of influencing better behaviors. And there's no better place to have better behaviors than avoiding emergencies or responding to emergencies. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
And we've been joined by a gentleman from Michigan Tech University. Can you introduce yourself?
This is
Oh,
Mark Mike.
there you are, Mark. I didn't
Yeah,
recognize you with the MTU email.
I'm sorry. I'm an adjunct professor there, and so they've got Zoom, and I've got my email with them as mt.mtu or mtu.edu. So that's
Very
how
good.
it comes up. So,
Very
but
good.
this
So Mark
great.
DeClerc is a great supporter of the Asset Leadership Network and a big supporter of the Institute of Asset Management. And he was part of the team that wrote the co-published white paper on asset management leadership with the IAM and the ALN. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. This is a great conversation. It reminds me of the recertification of a flood protection system when I was working for a large municipality that we had to undergo with FEMA. And we did a multi-pronged approach. One of them was the levy analysis and mapping procedure that was outlined by FEMA in their code of register that you have to follow in order to determine in order to help recertify your flood protection system. A lot of technical stuff that's involved. But the other aspect that we did on our own was we actually created an asset management plan of a flood protection system, which was 16 miles of concrete and old basements of private properties that had river rock from the 1800s that was part of their flood protection system, and embankments and bridges, and going through an inventory and condition assessment, looking at the demands. And the biggest thing we picked out of that was the risk that it was involved with our public. And we were able to take the model of the extent of flood scenarios from FEMA, put it on a GIS mapping system, and overlay the city as a whole. And we used our asset management plan to identify the risks then on the GIS model. And it gave us a more comprehensive ESG principle look, environmental, societal, good governance type of benefits that we needed to deliver and take a more holistic approach. So we really need to pay attention to risk and flood insurance rates, and also how that impacted our underserved populations in our community. How did the risk and the flood scenarios impact our preparation? Where do we build sandbags? Where do we protect first aid cross first responder centers, senior centers, underserved neighborhoods, places where there are communities of refuge during a flood event? It just gave us a broader picture of how do we marry ESGs with an asset management risk, with being prepared per FEMA's outline for disaster resiliency and preparedness. Very great experience of how we tried to find approaches to look at it more holistically.
And which organization led that?
I was with city engineer for City of Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Excellent. That is such a perfect example of a solution to the problem that we identified related to Wyoming. Cecilia, perfect connection for Cecilia Moat, President of Strategy and Sites, ALN organizational member, and our equity team leader.
Well, I just love what it was, Mark, right?
Mark, yes, DeClerc.
Who just shared almost exactly what I was going to raise. The importance of equity in the issue of disaster preparedness stems from the fact that those who are least likely to recover from a disaster have to be at the center of the planning for disasters. And not only for disasters, but for asset management. And oftentimes, those are the areas that are least cared for and least managed as an asset. They are your areas of blight in communities, brownfields and the like, that don't have the attention and don't get they are not typically the squeaky wheel that has all the infrastructure attention and the like. And so taking that holistic approach that he just spoke to, of looking at who are the parties that will most be harmed by any given disaster. Where are our assets that are most at risk of deteriorating further to a point where they're inutile? Those are the types of thinking, that kind of mindset and focus has got to be the key. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mark, you didn't have to leave.
No, it's a conversation.
No, Cecilia, you hit it right on the nail on the head there. When we look at flood protection systems and the risk, if we're not addressing how we're going to either eliminate or not put certain population centers or communities in a annual flood insurance premium that they have to pay, because that premium, that takes away from building wealth in our community.
Yes.
And when we remove the ability to create wealth within our community, our cities as a whole tend to implode is the wrong word, but deteriorate is what I'm saying. Because we really need to focus on that, like you said, is what is our society telling us? Let's engage them. What does it mean to them? Because if this is going to be another financial hardship, we're not providing value, not through their lens.
No, that's absolutely right. And it's not just, you just raised the point, it's not just the physical asset, it's the financial asset, the tangible economic development of a community that is going to be decimated by certain things. And even if they are not decimated by the actual flooding, the increased cost of flood insurance every year to the resident, the decreased attractiveness of that area to developers is a cycle that becomes non-ending. I remember when I worked on the Ford Heights Deer Creek flood mitigation project. Ford Heights, Illinois was one of the poorest communities in the nation at the time, and probably isn't much better now. But that flood mitigation project did exactly what you were raising. People were oppressed by their insurance rates. Their market values were very low, so they really had no equity to speak of, and there was no development. It's a perfect storm for becoming not just an underrepresented, but an undermined community. And we have to not undermine any further those underrepresented, under-resourced communities where we've not given the attention. We have to focus it, and having an asset management mindset will get you aware of where those are when you do your inventory. And your inventory should be of the physical and of the social. Who is there? Who are the players that can help you understand what the needs are and what the potential risks are, and how can we mitigate those risks? And that's doing it as a collaborative effort, not just the residents, the government. It's doing it with everybody coming in and stopping and saying, what do we have here? What are we trying to
That sounds like what
maintain and build.
Mark was involved with. That was really successful. What entity led that? Was it the city of Grand Rapids or was it a federal agency?
It was it was the city of Grand Rapids that we were forced under mandate to recertify our flood protection system, and the mandate come from FEMA. So we were locked hand in hand with FEMA, had to walk down this path together, but we had to engage our community in a number of forums. But there was also the fact that we saw the writing on the wall because we did the asset management plan and identified where the risks were. It forced us to think in a more comprehensive ESG process. That's what was the big kicker. So we talk about asset management leadership. We really talk about leaders who can influence communities and others around them when they're using that ESG mindset at the forefront of their thinking and decision making. I think that's what you're alluding to with the picture of the Wyoming road.
Yes.
You know, I just, you know, I'm a through hiker, and I just got done 4 weeks of hiking the southern part of the Pacific Crest Trail in California. And so I'm walking on California Highway 2, which was closed, which had similarities to what that Wyoming collapse, that Wyoming road that collapsed. And I'm looking at all the rock that was hewn. I'm looking at the upslope and downslope of the mountain. And you got this road that was carved in probably back in like the 1950s or so. And it's there's a 2-lane road. And you think of all the operations and maintenance costs that go in on an annual basis to keep that road open from all the boulders and rocks and whatnot, debris that's falling on there. And the fact that the California wildfires that came right up to where I was at was having an impact on the stability of the slopes, which was unstable. And that road gave out in about 4 different locations. There was a lot of subsidence that you'd say, wow, the clues here are I shouldn't even open this road. So the ESG principle forethought would be perhaps having a road there is not the right solution. Is there a different solution?
Yeah.
Should we do it in a more sustainable type of framework? And what would that framework be? So before jumping into the knee-jerk reaction of got to fix the road, got to open it, what are the other factors in an ESG type of decision-making framework do we have to consider?
Excellent. Well, this obviously is over our 30-minute, but it's too interesting and to stop. So I see Cecilia nodding her head with what Paul was saying there, or what Mark was saying. Paul, I don't know if you want to jump in on any of this, but then also there is a paper that Dragon mentioned about insurance and the nature of risk changing into the interconnected, fast-paced world. And so thank you for sharing this. We'll look into this further and maybe even invite the author to come speak with us. But Dragon, if you want to join, let me know and we'll put you in there. I'm sorry, Cecilia, did you want to comment on what Mark was saying?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about what Mark had said and also what Jack had said earlier about Rockville and whether or not they had or didn't have their strategic asset management plan. And the issue really is, Mark, you mentioned the word mindfulness. An asset leadership network, what our focus has always been, is about being mindful, driving down leadership to every level of the organization so that they are mindful of all the piece parts. And I like to talk about holistic, inclusive, equitable economic development. And as we look at ESG lenses on these things, you really do have to pull together and be mindful that everything is integrated and interdependent.
So So let's check in with Jack Kelly to see how ISO 55011 is possibly a tool to address equity along with the many other issues.
So, okay, let me get my video to work. Here we go.
Come back, Jack, come back.
My video decides that I look so poorly that I need not to be
Not at all.
visible. So what ISO 55000 helps accomplish is it helps organizations that cover a wide area and a wide variety of other organizations like governments, for example, municipal, national governments, and also organizations. They could be professional associations within, say, the water sector that want to advance asset management among their members, who are, of course, all in the water sector. So any organization that wants to advance asset management in a broad area across a wide variety of other organizations that are asset owning organizations will find ISO 55000 useful in helping them do that.
55011.
I'm sorry, 55. Thank you, 55011. Because what in the world of asset management, we think from an organizational perspective, all organizations that have management system standards recognize that their actions, the goals that they set and how they accomplish them are influenced by what they call stakeholders. And so your stakeholders could be your lenders, they could be your insurers, they could be regulatory agencies. You're influenced by your stakeholders. So what 55011 does, it says, well, let's take a top-down look at stakeholders. Let's look at everybody's stakeholders, and let's look at all of the stakeholders that can influence the adoption of asset management. And when you take that perspective on those stakeholders, you also recognize you recognize entities that aren't recognized as stakeholders by individual organizations, but in fact have influence over them. And those tend to be like government organizations. And so the easiest way, I say easiest, the most powerful way to influence the whole breadth of those stakeholders, whom in 55011 we call participants, and we call them participants in an enabling environment for asset management. So in other words, if you can create a more enabling environment, that is an environment that supports the adoption of asset management, then you can influence the organization. You're not ordering that. Well, actually, if you're Congress, you can pass a law and say, okay, all the electric utilities need to have asset management plans. Whether or not we give you a grant or not, you just have to have them. Or they can pass laws that say, we're going to give tax incentives to organizations that have asset management plans, because we think that there's a societal benefit in doing that. And they can also go as far as like what the Australians have done, and they can say, we're declaring national goals for resiliency, for ESG, for inclusive. We have national goals that say, as a nation, we want to embrace these values across the nation. And those are values that can be affected by, in fact, facilitated by good asset management. So asset management, remember, is a way to connect how you manage your organization and the assets within it to achieving your objectives. So if you make the objectives be in line with these objectives that we're talking about, then asset management is a tool to get there. And Mark had a great example of that, and all of us know examples of that. And so that's where 55011 has such potential power. And Mike, what I can provide to you, I can't give you a copy of the standard that's in development, but I can give you a briefing document that kind of describes what it does, and ALN can share that.
Well, that would be really great to get hands on that, because I like the term that you've moved away from stakeholders. I wasn't sure if you, like Jim Dieter had shared, we were moving away from stakeholders as a term because not everybody actually has a stake. They're not owners and the like. And your move to participants is interesting. We talked about interested parties. They're influential parties as well. So the question becomes inviting people to participate. It becomes a question of seeing who should be participants. Does 55,011 walk people through a template of figuring out what questions to ask to determine and define participant and broaden, like we'd like to do in 55,000, broaden what is the relevant stakeholder to be beyond the usual suspects?
So the thing about, one of the things that always kind of, I guess, bothered me about 55,000's way of thinking about stakeholders is that it's stakeholders perceived as relevant by the organization. Well, that's up to the organization to be smart about who it should be paying attention to, and not everybody's equally smart about that. So, and you know, when something comes out of the left field and kind of bites you, you know, it's like, oh my God, there's a stakeholder we've been ignoring. Well, that's not a good thing. But you know, it's a way of saying, it's asking the question differently. It's saying, who can influence the adoption of asset management in any one of a number of ways? And what we realized is that you have to I'll answer your question in just a second, Cecilia. What we've done is we've taken a look at all of the possible participants in an enabling environment, and we've divided them into two groups. We've divided them into government participants and non-government. The reason for that is that since public policy, we view public policy as such a powerful enabler of asset management, that you have to do that through government agencies. You know, you and I did public policy for 36 years in the federal government, but I was in the Office of Management and Budget, and that's what we did. We were part of the Office of the President, and we set government-wide policies. I know a little bit about that, how that works in the United States, at least. But so public policy can be extraordinarily important, but how do you engage the public policy making process? And one of the bottom line best practices in 55,011 is we say government agencies should involve asset management experts. They should bring asset management expertise into the policy making processes that affect asset management. And what's interesting is within the US government, we've got a couple of pockets of areas for policy or sectors, transportation and water being the two main ones, where asset management has actually kind of made its way into congressional awareness, but only as a condition of giving grants or loans. So it's not like they've said, okay, asset management is good, we're going to just mandate it for everybody. They say, if you want to get a federal transit agency loan for a local transit agency, or you want to get a state highway grant, you need to demonstrate various levels of competence with respect to asset management. And in the water sector, what's interesting is I can't find any law that says asset management, but what I can find is a whole wealth of information that the Environmental Protection Agency has put out that basically has interpreted, like the Clean Water Act, some requirement of the Clean Water Act, to be equivalent to meeting some asset management requirements. And so EPA as an agency has done a lot to promote the use of asset management by its grantees and the people who receive EPA loans. And then, as Mike mentioned earlier, DOD has started embracing asset management.
Yeah, Jack, but doesn't the EPA, if I recall from their website, they embrace the ESG concept, the ESG model, in which on the societal piece, we talk about engaging our public, but we talk about, you know, the customer that's actually experiencing the asset. And from that, the customer can range from a diverse and inclusive set of the public, so that we can get a range of opinions of how they are how do they feel, what's their experience of using the asset, in conjunction with the technical piece, which is what you're saying about the subject matter experts, which kind of forms that level of service piece of definition of asset management. You got a technical component and you have a customer component. So what does the consultant say, or the subject matter expert say technically, but then how about the customer that's actually going to experience the asset at the end? I think the two have to kind of be married. There is what the EPA may have been saying as part of the ESG spheres that they have on their website. Is that, did,
That's great. Jack, did you pick up any of that ESG
Well,
concept?
what we have said is, well, first of all, a government has to, if not everybody has embraced ESGs, right? I mean, that's sort of
No,
a,
did you see
there's some
anything
people,
in the EPA documents that address the concepts of ESG?
I'm not aware of them, but that doesn't,
Okay.
that's just my own ignorance. But my point is that we can't assume that all governments across the world, and you got to remember that ISO standards are written for everybody. So that everybody, all governments are going to have the same level of awareness or concern. What we can see looking internationally with regard to asset management is that some of the governments that took a stand early and required the adoption of asset management usually focused it on sectors of their economy that they considered critical infrastructure sectors. You know, whether it was electricity, whether it was water, you know, and those were the two principal ones. Those were the ones that got the most attention. But one of the challenges we have in the international asset management community is to get those governments to think about how the successes they've enjoyed in those sectors could be replicated in other infrastructure sectors. And one of the challenges that we have in doing that, and I can't speak to all governments, but in the United States government, is our policy-making process at the legislative level is highly fragmented. So you've got, you know, congressional committees and subcommittees that focus on very narrow sectors. And when there's nobody that stands back and says, hey, oh, we've got success over here in transportation, we've got some success over here in the water sector through EPA. What about broadband sector? What about the healthcare sector? What about education? So that no one has stepped back and taken a kind of a cross government look at all the sectors that could benefit by the successful adoption of asset management. But when they do, 55,011 is going to provide them, with the way we describe, we say it's a toolkit. It's a toolkit to help you understand where you are as a participant in the enabling environment, and as a participant, what benefits you can receive from promoting the adoption of asset management, and also what tools do you have available to you as this kind of participant to influence the public policy process. And so it tells you where you fit, and then what you can do. If you have, like in the case of the insurance industry, what we think you can do in the insurance industry, if you think this way and you do the math and it works, then you can condition set your insurance rate based on the asset management competence of your insurees.
Excellent.
If you're a government, you can take these are my national goals. Here are the agencies and the sectors of the economy that are important in achieving those national goals. They may not all be government. Some of them may be private sector. And here are the kind of policies we can come out with as a government to spread the adoption of asset management, which gives us as a government greater confidence that our nation will achieve these goals.
So you're talking about other governments. We've got Dragon from Canada. Thanks for joining. And you were referencing some other ISO documents in relation to this conversation.
So in fact, what I like to add is that in the context of the major disruptions, you know, the asset management is only a part of the whole picture. In this regard, emergent and systemic risk and interconnection and so on, the concept of resilience has to be added to.
Resilience.
And in this regard, we have to find out how to connect those two concepts. We had conducted recently some major studies, for example, a major ice storm in the Great Montreal area, where some more 2.5 million customers are exposed. It is around 4 million people, industries, and so on and so on. And the asset management is only the part of that. You have to get your assets robust You have to get your assets functional. You have to get the same for your systems. But in the case of major events, we face so-called massive common cause failures. And it goes beyond asset management. You have to involve the resilience, where the restoration is a significant part of. So the taking into account the main steps in the resilience, planning, absorption, restoration, and learning. In fact, good asset management is also the question of overall control. You control your processes, and the resilience. In fact, if you want to have a efficient resilience, it is the whole society project. The question is, I work for Hydro-Quebec. It is major electrical utility in Quebec. In the case of major interruptions, and there is where the responsibility of Hydro-Quebec stops, and where the civil society and other organizations start with their responsibility. We can't take in the whole responsibility. So in this case, the government, parliament, civil society, enterprises, and civil society have to be involved to defend this overall resilience framework, where asset management will be part of the whole picture.
Excellent. And you mentioned specific ISO standards in the chat. Will you go ahead and mention those documents just so we have them in the video?
It is ISO 35050, published at the end of the last year. It is a complement of ISO 31000, which is on risk management. It takes into account specific emergent and systemic risks that should be regarded slightly differently. It is and where the resilience is the part of. So some people from this technical committee also worked for this document on new ways of insurance, because they propose some models, because the classical approaches in insurance seem not to be good enough for major disruptive events. So it is not final document, but it is a significant contribution to way how to think about that.
Well, that's a good information for us and our insurance explorations. So thank you.
It is the Zurich University, a team that worked on that. And the Swiss know what the insurance is, so it is worth looking at.
Okay, thank you. We're definitely going to do that. So, Cecilia,
I was just wondering, as Dragon was speaking, because you think about, the thought came to my mind, COVID, a perfect storm of general systemic interdependence,
exactly,
and integration, where if you had players that had asset management plans with disaster recovery plans that were well understood by their organizations and could come together and communicate and share those in collaboration to keep the overall system going. And I'm wondering, Dragon, in the work that you've done, or even you, Jack, in looking at the participants in 50,011, looking at that example of COVID and what didn't happen and what did happen, and what lessons can we take away from a perfect storm that wasn't a storm, but
The way I put that in the chat. In fact, we have two families of disruptive events. The first family is where your physical assets are destroyed. Earthquake, tornadoes, ice storms, and so on and so on. And that will solicit different dimensions of your resilience. It is technological and so on. But in the case of COVID, all our assets were perfectly intact, but the organization as such completely changed. As supply chains changed. You remember only this event in the Suez Channel with this disruption. We have only an accident, and the part of the world traffic was blocked, and delays that were enormous. So it is the demonstration that of overall interconnection and then the complexity, and the usual ways of analyzing that are not good enough. You have to take some other approaches, and what is developing right now, even in asset management, taking into account so-called the complexity theory or complexity science, which contributes to better understanding of new phenomena. The classical ways are too linear, and they are not able. Classical methods are not able to adequately model the today's reality.
That's a very interesting new term, complexity science. At least it is a new term for me.
Yeah, complexity science. Can I throw another? Well, it's not a new term for us, but I can't let this august group go away without asking what your thoughts are on how marrying asset management with artificial intelligence might help us better prepare for disaster recovery and resilience.
It is new technologies are quite useful, but as all those new technologies, there is a lot of discussion about risks of those new technologies. So we could be aware that some things could turn in a way that we don't want to. So we have to be prudent,
There's from the COVID a lesson learned, and then combine it with the AI. There was likely a shift in demand. We went from everybody going to the office and all the utilities that service the offices to shutdowns for an extended period of time that forced everybody to stay at home. And so, those sanitary sewer systems, water systems that we use in our neighborhoods that they're risky because they're old and their condition is in bad shape and they've had decades of disinvestment, but they're not on the greatest risk profile when it comes to comparing to like trunk lines and main distribution lines that are in our main street corridors. So you have an automatic shift in the demand, and were our assets able to take that? And people were getting stir crazy at home and wanted to go out, so you have people on sidewalks walking. You had them at biking more often, even though there were less points of conflict with regards to vehicles. Our trail system was overwhelmed, and that took a significant beating. And the National Park Service having to scramble to try and deal with all the people that went to trailheads and not to adversely impact the environment. How do you shift so quick on the fly And perhaps AI may be able to allow us to quickly look at the different models and make better predictions on how we deal with such quick hitting changes like COVID, as opposed to a flood or a hurricane. We've had a number of those in our country and in several nations across the globe. So we can use those lessons learned, those models, and have a lot of different models to predict different scenarios. But like Dragon said, what about the ones that we're not typically thinking about? How do we adjust quick enough that we can mobilize contingency plans and be more resilient?
Let me just throw in that talk about AI. AI still, it sounds like we're a long way from perfecting it. And one of the things that I've read about it is that its strengths have to do with analyzing vast bodies of existing data. So essentially, you're talking about history, and things that are part of the known body of knowledge. What I have not heard any application of AI is its predictive abilities, and that's just my own ignorance. I don't know.
Well, that's because you haven't listened to some of our programs where our members are taking thousands of work orders from existing facilities, feeding it into AI and asking what's going to be the next thing that we're going to have to do. So
You're right.
they're moving from reactive work orders to preventative maintenance. And that's a
That's great.
specific example to address. I'm so glad that we have one from one of our members even. Of course, that's
Great.
Simone Onuma. So thank you all for making this just one of our most engaging and exciting programs. Appreciate you being willing to jump in, and want to now go to our typical closing. Nick has a baby who is sick, so he's not able to thank you all. So I'm doing that for you. This has been an excellent conversation about disaster resilient asset leadership. And we'd like to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, CGI, and all of our members. And please join us again next week. And then on next week is the program with NIBS, Brains and Bytes, Digital Twins and AI workshop. So maybe we will be able to look at some disaster preparedness examples there. And 4th of July is a Thursday, so we'll be not presenting then. And we might take a little time off in July to recharge some batteries, but we'll keep you informed of what's happening. And thank you all again, especially for those of you who jumped into the panel. Have a good rest of your day. See you next week.
Okay.
Thanks, Miguel, for having us have a conversation and
Okay.
share.
I'm clicking.
I put a link to some resources to complexity science. You know, it is worth looking at.
I saved the chat. The chat is stock full of good stuff this week.
Yes, it really
Okay,
is.
look, for example, Santa Fe Institute or New England Complexity Institute.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Bye for
Okay,
now.
That's great. Ciao. Have a great weekend.
Have you too.